In this video, we're going to complete the same process that we had in the previous scenario. We looked at the closing process when a company has net income. Now we're going to look at the closing process when a company has a net loss. The steps are the same, right? So we start with 100 in revenue, but instead of 40 in expenses, you've got 115 in expenses. So the expenses are higher than the revenues, so we're going to end up with a net loss, right? We follow the exact same steps, but it looks a little bit different when we get to step 3. So with a net loss, right, we have a little bit of different entry when we get to step 3. So that's really, really important. Okay, so let's look at the first thing. What's the first step? We close out revenues to income summary. So here is our revenues. We move this to income summary. Revenues has a credit balance. So we're going to move that credit balance from revenues to income summary. So I'm going to put 1 here. 100, that makes it 0. Income summary now has 1, 100. Income summary now goes to 100. That first entry, I should have did this first, but that's okay, is debit revenues for 1, credit income summary. All right, expenses, the same thing, right? We've got a 0 out expenses. It has a 115 debit balance, so we're going to credit expenses and move it to income summary, right? So my second entry is going to be a debit to income summary. And so for 115, and it's going to be a credit to expenses, right? Which makes it 0. And this balance actually needs to be over here on this side. All right. So now we have to close income summary to retained earnings, right? So that's what we need to do. We need to close income summary to retained earnings. But look at income summary. Income summary doesn't have a credit balance. Income summary has a debit balance. So how do we close income summary to return earnings? How do we get rid of the 15 debit balance? Well, we've got a credit income summary and debit retained earnings. So when we have a net loss, right, we're going to debit income summary, debit retained earnings and credit income summary, right? Notice, look at net income. And net income, our entry here was a debit to income summary and credit retained earnings. But when we have a net loss, we now debit retained earnings and credit income summary. So here for income summary, I'm going to credit income summary for 15. That's going to be my 3. Right? I'm going to credit income summary for 15. And I am going to debit retained earnings. So this is my 3 here. Okay? So please keep in mind, step number 3, right? If you have a net loss, you're going to debit retained earnings and credit income summary. If you have net income, you're going to debit income summary and credit retained earnings, right? Because income summary is different. If it's a loss, you're going to have a debit balance in income summary. If it's a net income, you're going to have a credit balance in income summary. Step 4 stays the same. I am going to debit credit dividends and debit retained earnings. So here for step 4, I have 10, and for step 4, I have 10. All right, so that doesn't change. Okay, so now my retained earnings is 975 because it's missing. I reduced it because of the loss, and I'll also reduce because of the dividends, right? My expenses are 0, my revenues are 0. My dividends is 0, my income summary is 0, and retained earnings has a balance in it. So please keep in mind, step 3 changes. If we have net income, we're going to debit income summary and credit retained earnings. If we have a net loss, we're going to debit retained earnings and credit income summary. That is the difference.